A supermarket manager kept sliding a quiet grocery store owner buyout papers, wrapping up every threat as just business. Then armed men stormed the mall where her niece was performing, and the manager ended up on his knees, begging the wrong woman for help. Sarah Kessler smelled the coffee before she saw it. 3 cardboard cups from Riverbend Grocers, the giant supermarket chain that had opened up 2 blocks from her tiny store 6 months ago. Ryan Mitchell set them on her counter like he was leaving a calling card. "Compliments of Riverbend," he said, flashing the same smile he used on the local news. "Figured you could use the caffeine. Long nights lately, with sales the way they are." Sarah didn't touch the cup. "How would you know how my nights are going, Ryan?" "Small town," he shrugged, glancing around her shop. Kessler's Corner Market, 41 years in the family now that Riverbend had swallowed half the block. "Look, Sarah, I'm not here to gloat. I'm here with an offer. Riverbend Regional wants to buy you out. Fair price. More than fair. Considering what? Considering you're doing about 60% of the business you were doing a year ago?" He said it gently, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "I hate to see it. I really do. Everybody in town remembers your dad running this place. But numbers don't care about nostalgia." Sarah was 53 years old, 5'6", with reading glasses that lived on a chain around her neck and gray, threading through hair she kept in a simple ponytail. To anyone walking through the door of Kessler's Corner Market, she was exactly what she appeared to be. A quiet, unremarkable woman who restocked shelves, ran the register, and closed up every night at 8 sharp. Nobody in Millbrook, Ohio, had any reason to know that 15 years ago, Sarah Kessler had operated under 3 different names across 4 continents for the CAA's Special Activities Center. Nobody knew she'd spent 2 years embedded in a Kurdish resistance network speaking fluent Arabic, or that she'd walked out of Aleppo with a bullet graze on her collarbone and a dead handler's extraction codes memorized in her head. Nobody knew, because she'd buried that woman the day she came home to bury her father instead. Cancer, fast and merciless, 6 years back. And took over the store because somebody had to, and because the quiet had felt like something she'd earned. "I'm not selling," Sarah said. Ryan's smile thinned. "Nobody's asking you to decide today, but I'd hate for this to get harder than it needs to be." "Is that a threat?" "It's the free market, Sarah." He picked his coffee back up. "Have a good one." The harder came fast. 2 weeks later, Sarah's produce distributor, a man named Curtis she'd worked with for 11 years, called to say he couldn't fill her order. "Riverbend's exclusive with the co-op now," he said, apologetic and useless in the same breath. "I got no choice, Sarah. They buy 40 times what you buy." Her insurance premium jumped without explanation. A city inspector she'd never met showed up unannounced and wrote her up for a cracked floor tile in the stockroom, a violation she was fairly sure didn't exist until that morning. And on a Tuesday in March, 3 teenage boys walked into her store, filled a backpack with energy drinks and candy in plain view of the security camera, and walked out laughing while Sarah stood frozen behind the register. Not because she couldn't have stopped them, but because stopping them the way she knew how would have ended with a boy's wrist broken and questions she could never answer. She let them go. She always let them go. That was the cost of the quiet life. You didn't get to use what you knew. The following week, Ryan Mitchell stood outside Riverbend's automatic doors doing a segment for the local news about community partnership, while, 40 yards down the sidewalk, a woman from the Millbrook Gazette snapped a photo of Kessler's Corner Market with its faded awning and its half-empty parking lot. The caption, when it ran, called Sarah's store a relic some say is overdue for retirement. Sarah read it standing at her own counter, alone, the bell over the door, silent for 3 hours straight. She thought about her father. He'd have hated seeing it end this way. Not with dignity, but with a slow public bleed, town gossip chewing on the carcass of something he'd built with his hands. She thought about closing early. She thought, not for the first time in 6 years, about the woman she used to be, the one who didn't lose to men like Ryan Mitchell, and she pushed the thought down the way she always did. Then, on a gray Thursday afternoon in April, everything changed. Millbrook Commons Mall sat at the edge of town, the kind of aging shopping center with a Sears-shaped hole where an anchor store used to be, and a food court that smelled permanently of pretzels. Sarah was there for exactly one reason. Riverbend Regional had scheduled a grand community showcase in the mall's central atrium, complete with a ribbon cutting, free samples, and Ryan Mitchell in a blazer shaking hands under a banner that read, "Riverbend, your neighborhood, reimagined." She hadn't planned to go, but her 9-year-old niece Emily was performing with her school choir at the event. Some deal Riverbend had cut with the elementary school for goodwill photos. And Sarah wasn't about to miss it, corporate banner or not. She was 3 rows back in the folding chairs, watching Emily fidget in her choir robe, when the men came through the east entrance. 4 of them. Tactical vests under loose jackets, faces calm in a way that made Sarah's stomach drop before her mind caught up. She'd seen that calm before. Not adrenaline, not nerves, but rehearsal. These men had done this before, or trained like they had. The first shot went into the ceiling. The atrium went from choir music to screaming in under 2 seconds. "Everybody down! Down! Now!" The lead gunman's English was accented. Eastern European, maybe Balkan, Sarah clocked instantly. But his command structure was crisp, professional. He wasn't panicked. He was working a plan. Sarah's body remembered before she did. She was on the floor with Emily, pulled under her arm, calculating exits, head counts, sight lines, before her conscious mind finished processing what was happening. 40, maybe 50 hostages. 2 exits she could see, both covered. 4 visible shooters, which meant there were probably 6, maybe 8 total. This kind of op didn't run light on manpower. "This is not a robbery," the lead gunman announced, pacing the small stage where the choir had been standing seconds earlier, Ryan Mitchell now on his knees beside a toppled ribbon-cutting podium, his blazer sleeve torn, his face gray. "You will remain calm. You will do as instructed. And you will live." Sarah kept her eyes down, her arm around Emily's trembling shoulders, and listened, not to the words, to the language underneath them. When the second gunman muttered something to a third in a language Sarah recognized immediately as Serbian, her 15 years of dormant training sat up and took notice. She'd worked against a fractured piece of this exact network once, a decade ago, in a very different life. A Balkan smuggling and extortion outfit that had rebranded itself, post-war, into something more mercenary. Hostage-taking for ransom, occasionally political theater, always brutally organized. If this was who she thought it was, these men weren't amateurs, and they wouldn't hesitate to start killing hostages the moment their demands weren't met on schedule. She heard the lead gunman on a cell phone now, barking coordinates to police outside, demanding $2 million and a helicopter within 90 minutes, or, his words, "The first body comes out the front doors." 90 minutes. Sarah had run hostage timelines like this before. 90 minutes was nothing. Local PD didn't have the equipment or the training to manage this. A tactical response from the state would take at least that long just to stage. And these men, she was almost certain now, had no intention of walking out peacefully regardless of what they were paid. She looked down at Emily. Then she looked, without moving her head, at the exits, the gunmen's positions, their weapons, their sight lines. The quiet life ended right there, on that cold tile floor, whether Sarah wanted it to or not. She waited for an opening, and it came 20 minutes later, when the youngest of the gunmen, barely into his 20s, sweating through his shirt despite the mall's air conditioning, walked the hostage line checking phones and IDs. When he reached Sarah, she looked up at him and spoke, quietly, in flawless, unaccented Serbian. "Tell your commander I need to speak with him. Alone. I can help you get what you actually want." The boy froze. His weapon didn't move, but his eyes did. Wide, uncertain, suddenly very young. Within 90 seconds, Sarah was standing, hands raised, being walked toward the stage while 50 hostages and Ryan Mitchell watched in stunned silence. The lead gunman, the others called him Dragon, studied her with narrowed eyes. "You speak my language," he said, switching to Serbian himself, testing her. "I speak 6, Sarah replied, calm, measured, the accent of a woman who'd lived it and not learned it from a book. "And I know exactly who you work for. Marko Radovanovic doesn't send men into American shopping malls without an exit plan, Dragon. So let's talk about what your actual exit plan is, because I don't think it involves a helicopter." Something shifted behind Dragon's eyes. Recognition, calculation, the beginning of doubt. "You know Marco's name," he said slowly, "so maybe you're not bluffing about the rest. Fine. You want to know why we're here? It's not the money, woman. Money is the receipt, not the reason." He tilted his head toward the ribbon-cutting banner still hanging crooked over the stage. "Riverbend. Your neighborhood, reimagined. This company. This expansion. You think that is groceries? That is laundry. Shell contracts, shipping paperwork, trucks that carry more than lettuce. Marco is owed a debt, and today somebody pays it, in front of cameras, so every other partner understands what happens when payments stop coming." Sarah kept her face perfectly still, though something cold moved through her chest. "And the man who signs the paperwork?" Dragon's mouth curled, almost amused. "Kneeling right there. 6 months he signs what we tell him to sign, to keep his stores open after the real numbers came back. How you say? Soft. He thought he was borrowing. Marco does not lend. Marco collects." He looked past her, toward Ryan Mitchell's gray, sweat-streaked face. "Today he learns the difference. Today everyone learns." Sarah didn't look at Ryan. She didn't need to. She understood now, with total clarity, exactly what kind of trap the last 6 months had been. The exclusive distributor deal, the sudden inspections, the newspaper photo of her half-empty parking lot. All of it downstream of a man drowning in a debt he'd never told anyone he owed, dragging a mall full of strangers, a children's choir, and her niece into the collection. The buyout offer, the pressure campaign. It hadn't been business at all. It had been a man trying to stay solvent long enough to keep feeding a machine that was never going to let him walk away clean. And it had put a gun to Emily's head 6 weeks later. Ryan Mitchell, kneeling 6 feet away, stared at Sarah Kessler like he'd never seen her before in his life. He hadn't. Not really. And now she understood, in ways he couldn't yet imagine, exactly who he was. What followed was 90 minutes that would later be described by the one FBI negotiator who eventually pieced it together as the most controlled hostage de-escalation I've encountered in 20 years of federal law enforcement. Though at the time, nobody outside that atrium had any idea what was actually happening inside it. Sarah didn't fight the gunmen. She talked to them. She told Dragon she understood his situation better than the police ever could. That a collection this size, this public, meant somebody above him needed this operation to either succeed spectacularly or fail in a way that sent a message. She told him, quietly, that she'd seen operations like his collapse before, watched men just like him get sacrificed by their own organizations when the extraction went sideways. She wasn't wrong, and some buried part of Dragon knew it. She kept him talking. She kept him negotiating with her instead of executing his 90-minute deadline. She asked questions that seemed sympathetic, but were, in truth, reconnaissance. How many men total, where the secondary team was staged, whether the explosives she'd spotted taped beneath the stage skirting were on a timer or a remote detonator. Dragon, flattered by a hostage who understood his world, who spoke his language and didn't flinch, told her more than he ever should have. Meanwhile, Sarah was doing something else entirely, something none of the 50 terrified hostages around her could see. Every time she shifted position for comfort, she was quietly repositioning herself relative to the gunmen. Every time she asked to check on her niece, she was mapping head counts and confirming that 6, not 4, gunmen were actually in play. two covering the loading dock exit, invisible from the atrium. Every time her hands moved to explain something better in Serbian, she was noting weapon types, safety positions, reaction times. She was building a plan, and she was buying time for the one thing she actually needed. The moment when local police, unable to break through, would be forced to escalate to state tactical response, giving her a coordinated external element to work with instead of against. It came at the 80-minute mark. Sarah heard it through the mall's broken skylight before anyone else did. The low thrum of a state police helicopter, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable to trained ears, the staged silence of a tactical team taking position outside. "Dragon," she said quietly, still on her knees, still playing the sympathetic hostage. "They're not bringing you $2 million. They're bringing you a bureau team. You have maybe 4 minutes before this goes very wrong for you specifically. I can still help you walk out of here, but only if you listen to me right now." For the first time, Dragon's composure cracked. "What do you want?" "I want you to let the children go first. All of them. Right now, through the east doors, no conditions. Do that, and I'll tell you exactly how to survive the next 10 minutes. He hesitated 1 second too long to be a real refusal. Then he barked an order, and 11 children, Emily among them, were herded toward the east exit under the watch of one gunman. That was the opening Sarah had been building toward the entire time. The moment the youngest gunman's attention split between the children and the doorway, Sarah moved. Not with violence first, but with precision. She drove her palm into Dragon's wrist at the exact angle that dropped his weapon before his brain registered the pain, her knee already rising into the second man's ribs before the first gun hit the floor. It took 11 seconds. It looked, to the hostages watching in horror-turned astonishment, like nothing they'd ever seen a 53-year-old grocery store manager do. Because it wasn't. It was 15 years of training that had never actually left her body, only gone quiet. She had Dragon's weapon in her hand and trained on the remaining shooter near the stage before he'd fully processed that his leader was on the ground. "Federal agents are outside," she said, in English now, loud enough for every hostage to hear, her voice utterly without panic. "Put it down. This ends now, or it ends worse for you." He put it down. The state tactical team breached 90 seconds later to find 4 gunmen restrained with zip-tied cable Sarah had pulled from a display stand, 2 more taken into custody at the loading dock after her earlier intelligence let the second wave move straight to their position, and 50 hostages, alive, unharmed, staring at Sarah Kessler like she'd descended from somewhere they had no name for. The FBI supervisory agent who arrived 20 minutes later, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diane Okafor, took one look at how the scene had been handled, the precise restraints, the tactical positioning, the intelligence that had let her team hit the loading dock crew with 0 shots fired, and asked one question before anyone else could speak. Who did this? 50 hostages pointed, almost in unison, at the grocery store manager sitting quietly on an overturned folding chair with her niece wrapped in her arms. Agent Okafor crouched in front of her, studied her face for a long moment. "You're Sarah Kessler," she said slowly. "Special Activities Center. I read your file in training 12 years ago. They told us you didn't exist." "I don't," Sarah said quietly. "Not anymore." Then, before Okafor could stand back up, she added, "There's something else you need. Before Dragon clams up with a lawyer, ask him about the shipping contracts. Riverbend Regional, he told me this was never about ransom. It was a debt collection dressed up as one, and there's a man in this building who's been signing off on falsified paperwork for months to feed it. You'll want to secure Ryan Mitchell before he has time to get his story straight." Okafor's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "Ma'am, with respect, today you very much did more than one thing." She turned and murmured something to the agent behind her, who peeled off toward the corner where Ryan Mitchell sat wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, looking, for the first time since Sarah had known him, like a man who understood exactly how much trouble he was in. The story that made the local news that evening, and, within days, the national news, wasn't the one Riverbend Regional had planned. Ryan Mitchell's grand community showcase ribbon cutting was reduced to a single grainy photo of him on his knees, forgotten almost entirely beside two headlines that ran side by side. Local grocer, former CA operative, single-handedly ends mall hostage crisis. And, 2 days later, once the Federal Financial Crimes Unit had finished tearing through Riverbend's shipping manifests, Riverbend Regional Executive charged in money laundering scheme linked to hostage standoff. It turned out Dragan hadn't been exaggerating to impress a hostage. Riverbend's community partnership expansion. The trucks, the co-op exclusivity deals, the sudden capital that had let Ryan undercut every small grocer within 20 miles. Had been running cartel money through falsified logistics contracts for the better part of a year. Ryan hadn't built the scheme, but he'd known. And he'd kept signing, because the alternative was admitting that Riverbend's real numbers had never justified its expansion at all, and that the only thing keeping his stores solvent was the debt he owed men who didn't accept late payments quietly. Ryan found her 3 days later, standing outside Kessler's corner market, where a line of customers stretched down the block, some out of gratitude, some out of curiosity, most simply because they finally understood exactly who'd been running the little store on 5th Street all along. He wasn't in handcuffs yet? That would come after the arraignment, once his lawyer stopped returning federal calls. For now, he was just a man out on bond, gray-faced, waiting for her outside a store he'd spent 6 months trying to bury. "I had no idea who you were," he said, and for once there was no salesman's polish in his voice at all. "Sarah, I'm sorry. For all of it. The pressure, the article, the distributor. I told myself it was just business." He swallowed. "It wasn't just business. I knew what I was signing. I told myself nobody would get hurt." "Somebody almost did," Sarah said. "My niece was 9 rows from a bomb taped under a stage because you needed 1 more quarter of good numbers." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You didn't know who I was. That's not really the point, Ryan. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like I mattered. Nobody does. And you didn't need to know Marko Radovanovich's name to know that money like that always comes with a bill." He had nothing to say to that. He nodded, and he left, and the buyout offer never came again. Not from Ryan, who wouldn't be signing anything on Riverbend's behalf for a long time, and not from whoever eventually took his place, because Kessler's corner market, 41 years old and counting, wasn't going anywhere. Sarah didn't do interviews. She turned down 2 television appearances, a book deal, and a formal commendation ceremony the Bureau tried to arrange, accepting only a quiet private visit from Director Okafor and a folded flag delivered with a simple "thank you" that Sarah kept in a drawer and never mentioned to anyone. She went back to restocking shelves, back to the ponytail and the reading glasses on the chain and the register that still stuck a little on humid days. But something in Millbrook had shifted permanently. Not because Sarah Kessler had changed, but because the town had finally seen, once, exactly what had been standing quietly behind that counter the whole time. 6 weeks later, Emily asked her, straight out, the question half the town was still too polite to ask. "Aunt Sarah? Were you, like, a real spy?" Sarah smiled, handed her a bag of groceries to carry to the car, and locked up the store for the night. "I was a grocer who paid attention," she said. "That's all anybody needs to be."